Welcome back to Sam and Jen Got Divorced. I am Genevieve. This is Samuel. And we've got Alanna back with us. We're super excited to have her in the house today.
Thank you.
We're going to talk about some travel and what that looked like for us. And some of the tips and tricks that we have and some of the lessons that we've learned throughout our divorce days and how travel contributed to our learnings and our growth. So come along for this ride or this plane ride or this train ride or however you like to travel.
And travel, I mean, I don't know if we've heard about this before. Travel as a form of therapy. So how did you
Travel
discover
therapy.
that?
I started traveling and then it was therapeutic. That's how I discovered it. I mean, the two of you
Right.
are therapists by trade, but
That's how I discovered it too, by the way. Yes.
Hey. They don't teach this in school?
No.
Travel is not a course?
No.
Okay,
Actually, you know
good.
what's funny? So I had a course and my professor asked me, she asked the class, like,
Yeah.
what is your form of self-care?
Yes.
And everybody was giving their forms of self-care. And I said travel. And she was like, that's not an appropriate answer for self-care.
Ooh,
I know. If you're listening,
here we are. Travel therapy.
That professor does not have a passport. I'm telling you right now.
I think she was an immigrant. But anyway, yeah, I'm going to send this to her. I'm going to send this to you.
You were wrong.
Here we
That's
are.
going to be the title of this podcast. You were wrong,
You were
professor.
wrong.
So how I came about travel as a form of therapy was during the pandemic. To paint a bit of a picture, things weren't going well in the world. And in my life, I was living close to downtown Toronto. I was living by myself, single, and all of my friends were married with children, with almost no exception. And they were all living in the suburbs, and I wasn't driving at the time. And because of the pandemic, we had our own bubbles. We had about 6 people in Toronto that we were allowed to see. So I couldn't see the people who were close to me. And even if I could, the lives that they were living was very different than the life that I was living. It was a difficult time for obviously a lot of the world. But for me, as a single divorced man, the complication that was added was the fact that I didn't have community in the way that I thought I would. And would have had I been married with children, which was my expectation. So I made the decision in fall of 2020 to take a trip with a few of my other single friends to British Columbia in Canada. We visited Vancouver, we visited Whistler, and we visited Tofino. And that was like a beautiful trip. We still have a group chat from that trip. But what I didn't tell them at the time was that I was looking to move for the first time in my adult life outside of Ontario, because I was just sick of the lifestyle and that coronavirus Toronto had presented me. When I went to Whistler, I liked how beautiful the mountains were. I liked how there was an active lifestyle that was very nature oriented. In my mind, I was just sick of lockdowns, and I thought, you know what, they can't lock down a mountain. No matter how many more waves of virus come, like if I go out here, I'll at least be in nature, and from a mental health standpoint, I'll feel connected to the outdoors in a way that I think will be better than being in an urban center where I have to stand 6 feet apart from anybody who I might be interested in talking to. By November 2020, I was living in Whistler, British Columbia.
Wow. November 2020, Whistler.
Yeah.
And November of 2020, where were you? Were you also traveling?
November 20. Well, I'm always traveling. Listen, I make miles, okay? Frequent flyer miles. I prefer to be on a plane like once a month. November 2020, I'm trying to remember where I was. I don't remember where I was exactly that time. But I know around that time when the pandemic hit, I was planning my exit as well. Because I was like,
I
no.
can tell you where you were. Because that was the last time we spoke.
Was that
November 2020?
2020?
Before this year, the last time we spoke was November 2020.
Where was
And
that?
I called you to let you know that I was moving. Do you remember that call?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
I do remember you letting me know. Yeah, okay.
And that was when I found out that I was divorced, which I had been divorced
Was
for 2 years, and I didn't know that I was divorced.
Okay.
So you can find out about that on one of our other episodes.
Okay.
But you were, I think, living in Ajax with your family.
Okay, so there, yes. I was in Ajax. I was in the East End. And I was planning. I remember I was planning and plotting my exit. I had my exit plan in full effect as soon as the pandemic hit. Because I wasn't going to live in Canada. So I was planning to move out of the country. And I was planning for April 2021 to move out of the country. But I think my understanding and I guess my exposure to travel as a form of therapy. Let me backtrack. When I think of therapy, I think of a space that you can be yourself, a space that you can be challenged to grow. I think of a space that you can be challenged to broaden your perspectives. I think of a space that you can challenge yourself to know more about yourself, right? So self-awareness, all that good stuff. Travel by nature helps you to do that. So when you travel outside of your immediate context, like with your immediate culture, with your immediate family or your friends or your familiarities, you have to come out of yourself and almost like challenge yourself to grow in different ways. Like you have to know how to, relate to somebody else who's in a different culture. Maybe you're trying to communicate with somebody who speaks a different language, whatever the case is. So I think you have to come out of yourself, and travel helps you to do that because you're going to be faced with different, just different circumstances, whether it's your plane ride and your layover is too long or your plane is delayed or whatever the case is. So you have to learn. You have to learn how to manage, how to cope, how to deal with stress, how to deal with the unexpected, all that stuff. And then it's also like self-discovery, self-exploration and curiosity and all that stuff, right? So I think in my life, because I had a passport when I was 8 months.
Okay.
I was 8 months old. I had a passport and I had already been to 3 countries. Thank you, Mom.
At 8.
Appreciate it. She planted that seed. So I had been traveling very intentionally for years. Every year I'd plan like a birthday trip. Shout out to my awesome girlfriends who are like, yes, we're coming. Just countries upon countries, cruises upon cruises. And I found that to be my form of self-development and growth and learning. And so I found a lot of those principles applied when I entered the therapeutic space. So I was like, oh, okay, this is like a different kind of form. Yes, we're talking, it's talk therapy, but a lot of those same views and approaches, right? Openness and, challenging your thoughts and things like that. Like they come out in therapy. And you have to do that when you're traveling.
Yeah.
And also conquering fears. Conquering fears is a big, big thing when it comes to both therapy and travel. A lot of people are afraid to travel around the world because they don't want to fly. I love flying. Like when I think of my favorite part of a trip, I think of when the plane is like leaving the ground.
Really?
Takeoff is my favorite
That
part.
is definitely the best part.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Like, and in my mind, what I think of is like, there's a big hunk of metal in the air. Like, this is not supposed to be in the air, right? Because according to the laws of gravity, metal is supposed to fall to the ground. But according to the laws of aerodynamics, which is different from the laws of gravity, like this can now fly through the air. Like it's in my mind, it is fascinating. And I think of this when I go on cruises. I'm like, there's a huge boat on water. If I tried to walk on, I couldn't walk on water. I would sink, right? So anyway, I think of those principles and those same kinds of ideas when I think of like travel and how it applies to therapy, because therapy requires for you to sometimes learn different rules, learn different laws for how you govern your life. Therapy also requires for you to sometimes find joy in the things that sometimes scare us, but like turn it into like excitement. I think there's so many crossover principles.
Well, we're talking about self-development.
I know.
We're talking about growth.
We got communication.
Right?
We got
Yeah.
everything. Like,
Okay.
it's there in travel.
Mind you, this is
I should be a
tied
travel
into-
therapist.
Yeah.
I'm Genevieve.
Go back. Let's
I'm your
go
new
back.
travel therapist. Call me if you'd like to travel and do therapy. No, I'm just joking. Go ahead.
Okay, because we're talking about therapy post-divorce, right? So you were going and you had, I don't know, all this stuff going on that you now were exploring on your travels. Is that what you're talking about?
I think part of it was a continuation,
Okay.
right? I think it was more intentional after divorce.
Okay.
Definitely more intentional. So I planned travel to get away from life and to do my work of healing.
Okay.
So that's where it came in for me anyways.
Yeah. I didn't really have, for the initial periods of time post divorce, I didn't really have a therapeutic plan, like a plan for health. I was just swimming and messing things up and like doing all kinds of unhealthy behavior. So for me, I wasn't trying to be therapeutic when I was traveling, at least not consciously. I wanted to have a good life. I wanted to enjoy myself. I wanted to feel better. I don't know if that's therapy,
Yeah, I think most people go to therapy because they don't feel good on some level. They want something different in their lives.
Right.
Yeah. So, and I think travel naturally gives us an opportunity to access that. Right?
I definitely felt better outside of my problems, removed from my immediate situation.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. One of the things that I remember, I wasn't going to stop traveling just because I had gotten a divorce. I planned my next year birthday trip after our separation. And this might be for a whole nother episode, but I remember being on that trip with a couple of my girlfriends, and we're out there and whatever. Obviously, there's going to be guys, and they want to buy you drinks and they want to be nice to you and all this stuff. But I remember at that time thinking,
So nice.
so nice. I know.
Yeah. The level of altruism of men on vacation is unparalleled.
It's oh goodness, it's so true. But I remember just being in a completely different space. So I was like, oh, I'm like separated from I'm like technically single, technically not legally, technically single, and being a different headspace on that trip because I was with two of my single girlfriends, and I was like, yeah, well, we can hang out and talk to boys and whatever, and not feel like constrained by that. That was like the first time where I was like, oh, this is a different kind of trip. And I remember thinking after that I really wanted to travel with more purpose, not just for like fun and leisure.
What sort of things were you learning about yourselves as you were traveling?
Okay, so I've never gone on a solo trip. Well, I went on my first solo trip last year. Up until that time, I would travel by myself and go to places, like go to conferences or go meet family or what have you, but I never went on a solo trip. So I'd always be with people and people that I had known for a long period of time. So there's checks and balances when you travel with people that know you because they have expectations and you've always presented in a particular way. You guys have co-created this kind of dynamic and everybody plays their role very nicely. When you travel by yourself, all you have is yourself. And what that means is there's nobody checking you. There's nobody looking over your shoulder. There's nobody who's kind of questioning your behavior, like side-eyeing you. Like, what do you do? Like, you're drinking too much. Like, you don't usually drink that much. Or you don't, right? And so there's a different level of, accountability. A different level of accountability when you travel by yourself versus when you travel with people that you know. Or even with groups that, you're a part of. You don't have the same expectations. And so what I learned about myself when I traveled solo was that I'm actually a lot less friendly than I thought. Most of my friends are extroverts. I am actually not an extrovert. And so I I coast. I coast on their outgoingness. And I do love adventure. I do love fun, and I'm always down to go. But I do coast on a lot of what they do. So I had to do that for myself. And that was actually hard. I was like, oh, I thought like I'm good to stay sitting in this hotel room. Like, no, I'm here. I got to go do something. Okay, what am I going to do? I was learning that I had to actually push myself to go out there. And
Do you think part of that was a safety thing? Like you were protecting yourself from all these other elements, especially given the fact that you were by yourself?
Not really. I never felt unsafe. I just didn't feel like doing much. Like,
Yeah, I've been there.
it's like
Yeah.
I'm good to sit in the hotel room and relax. But yeah, I think I learned that about myself, and I should say in that maybe that I'm braver than I thought. Like then I did go out and I did talk to strangers and I did sit down and cultivate like new connections with strangers. So I think that was cool too.
Yeah, discovering new things about yourself, growing, building confidence.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I learned that I really enjoy connecting with people across cultures, which I knew growing up in Toronto. Toronto is pretty multicultural. And something I've always been fascinated by is how different cultures engage with each other. But I found when I traveled, I was one of the people who people from other cultures felt more comfortable around, and I felt more comfortable around them, depending on the culture. So that was something I didn't necessarily know. I suspected, but then when I'm in a different country, speaking a different language, and these people have been raised in a completely different culture and context, I was able to like build connections in ways that I was really grateful for. I didn't know that I could do. The major exception being in Whistler, where that culture was very different than my culture, and building connections was more difficult.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I mean, when you're traveling, often you can be alone with your thoughts. So how was being alone with your thoughts post-divorce?
Our hope is that by sharing our mistakes and what we've learned from them, be supporting healthy conversations in our communities. So if you're enjoying listening to this, do us a quick favor, like, comment, and subscribe. It's not only encouraging, but it helps us in tangible ways get you on the next episode, family.